Good afternoon, guys.
Good afternoon.
Good afternoon.
My name is Keith Carrington. I'd like to start off by thanking you guys for taking the time to come and join us today. We've done an analysis of the FEC intermodal rail network within Florida, and we're ready to get started whenever you guys are to present you some recommendations.
Please go.
I'd like to start off today by talking about inefficiency. This is something we're going to focus on all throughout the presentation. Currently, as of today, the FEC rail network within northbound freight loads 75% empty units. Alongside this inefficiency, there's also a growing market of Orlando that our competitors are tapping into. We believe with our recommendations that not only we can eliminate these inefficiencies, but we can also serve this growing market and compete with our competitors. Here are just a few numbers that we think we'll be able to deliver with some of these recommendations. $4.1 million increase in contribution margin, 2.56 reduction in cost per unit handled, and over 60,000 53-foot containers added in volume to the network.
Today, we will analyze the market. We will see our plan from the shipper's perspective. We will also propose an intermodal solution with the results and also the implementation. My name is Michelle Garcia. This is Candace, and this is Keith, as mentioned before. Unfortunately, we're missing one teammate today, Andrew Stevens, who could not make it.
But we'll field all his questions as best we can.
Market situation. So right now, there's a Central Florida intermodal opportunity in Orlando. So we have the opportunity to fill that 75% of trucks that are going empty to the north, filling them to Orlando. There are 5 current means of serving Central Florida in the market, which are the Port of Long Beach, the Port of Savannah, the Port of Houston, the Port of Jacksonville, and the Port of Miami in the Everglades. So going from Long Beach to Orlando, there are 2 options. You can either take CSX or Norfolk Southern. Going from Houston, you can take those 2 options or truck it all the way to Orlando. And from Savannah, you can truck it to Orlando, as well as from Jacksonville, Miami, or Port Everglades. So these are some costs, the costs related to the different options. As you can see in our handout in page 4, they range from $5 million to $80 million, $5,000 to $80,000, and the lead times range from 24 days to 32 days. Right now, FEC has a proposal of 2 options that are the cheapest options within all the alternative routes existing today, and our lead time is of 31, which is within the range.
So as you can see, even though the range for lead time is 24 days to 32 days, the average is around 30, so our 31 days is pretty comparable to what's on the market right now. When we were looking at this, we wanted to say from the perspective of the shipper and kind of what will our customer want to see when we're offering these products. Because if we're going to offer an intermodal service, we want it to be something that our customer will want. So first, we were looking at the elements that a shipper would look at when considering which way they're going to ship their products from China. So first, we were looking at, they would look at the product elements. And this is something we cannot control, but things like the demand variability and how much safety stock they need, how much lead time they can work with, and then product characteristics. Can this item even be on the rail? Are they going to have the volumes that are going to, merit filling a full international container? Next, they would look at transportation elements and kind of the service that they're comparing, looking at things like the lead time and the reliability of the service, and for a lot of them, one of the most important would be the cost. Then they would also consider outside factors such as environmental and political factors, such as the congestion that we're facing with strikes in Long Beach and LA right now. So kind of keeping with this perspective of how a shipper would look, we built a scorecard of how kind of the shipper would compare these, and we entered in every single option that is currently on the market right now to get to Orlando, as well as the two FEC options.
And as Candace is explaining, this is actually a weighted scale, and we put the highest weight on cost, then reliability, lead time, and then environmental time.
Because while we do care about the reliability and we do care about the lead time, the environment, we need to make sure we can afford these options. As you can see, FEC option 1 and option 2 scored evenly at 80, and they were the highest scoring on this scale. But our next closest competition would be the trucking only from Everglades or Miami, which is great because that's going to be easy to steal freight because it's already in Everglades, it's already in Miami, so it's in the right spot. We could just get that to be intermodal instead of truck only after it gets off of the ocean carrier.
As Candace was just describing some of these service factors from a shipper's perspective, because that's really the key to us attracting the volume that we need to make these proposals work correctly. So because we feel that option 1 and 2 that we're considering for FEC, both are profitable from a shipper's perspective when compared to the alternative routes, I'm going to break down here option 2, which involves transloading at the FEC Hialeah facility. And here's just a little diagram kind of walking through it. It goes back and forth. It's a little confusing with the arrows, but this is the northbound freight headed this way, the blue arrow, and then the southbound freight headed back here. So as you can see, we start off here with the Port of Miami and the Port of Everglades. It's a little fuzzy, I'm sorry about that, but this is the Port of Miami right here and the Port of Everglades right there. And this is the Hialeah Intermodal Transload Facility. We really wanted to focus on the Port of Miami for 2 key reasons. First of all, it already has the 50-foot dredged depth for post-Panamax ships, which will become a bigger factor in kind of a slightly longer-term view around 2016. But then also, it has this favorable and efficient shuttle service to the Hialeah Transload Facility already in place. So once the international freight comes in here to the Port of Miami, it's then going to be shuttled for around $70 a unit to the Hialeah Transload Facility, and it's going to be transferred from a 40-foot ISO international container onto our domestic 43-foot containers. And as I'm sure you're all aware, there's a 3-to-2 load ratio, so for every 3 international containers, we can fit that onto 2 53-foot domestics. The freight will then move from the Hialeah facility, or the effective end of the line in the south for FEC, will then be transferred to, sorry about that. This freight will then be transferred to the Cocoa Beach facility, which that's one of the proposals that we're making, is to make the investment in Cocoa Beach to have a intermodal facility there, in which we can base our operations and shuttle operation to the Orlando market. Here's Cocoa Beach right here, and this is Orlando. The freight will move in our domestic 53-foot units to Cocoa Beach and will be transloaded onto trailer truck operations, which we're going to be purchasing more of if this is successfully implemented after a trial period. And then it's going to be trucked to Orlando and trucked back empty with some little bits of volume coming in from the remnants of citrus groves and as well as the small amounts of freight from Orlando that needs to travel north. It's going to travel back north to the Cocoa Beach facility, and then it's going to go to Jacksonville. Here it will be combined, it will either be transferred to the Class 1 CSX railroad, or will be used by our subsidiary FEC Highway Services. We'll distribute it to the final customer's destination. The freight will then move from Jacksonville, will be combined. Now we're at the southbound end. Will be either filled, all the empties will be filled up and distributed back down to the line following the chain and reverse order. To make this successful, I mentioned that we're going to try to attract some new volume into the network, and this is going to be done by adding ports of call to the Port of Miami. We had 2 specific shippers in mind that fit kind of the characteristics of something that we'd be looking into. This is K-Line and Nordana. And we feel that this added volume could add over 60,000 units, and at our cost of units handled, be reduced by over 2.8%. And Michelle's going to give you some more details about that.
So we're assuming that these two new ports of call we'll have one stop every 4 days at the Port of Miami, which adds to 91 stops per year. The total TEUs per year will be 188 and 500,000, which gives us a total of 6,800 total 53 foot TEUs. The projected volume without these new lines for 2016 is 475,000 units. And this would increase with the 6,800,000 units we're gaining from these two lines, which is a 12.81% increase in volume, which yields to a 2.56% in cost reduction.
So we know that this is already a good option, and we know that FEC is already looking at different innovations such as having LNG locomotives. So we'd like to push a step further and have LNG trucks and convert our diesel trucks that we are using from the Cocoa Beach facility to Orlando and actually convert those to LNG trucks. We want to partner with Omnitech, and instead of purchasing LNG vehicles, which are about 200 grand, buying a diesel truck is 120 plus the conversion kit fee of 40,000. So once we've reached 250,000 miles, which we would assume that our trucks would be making it that long, it becomes more efficient to have these with the savings we will be receiving with fuel. One of the major downfalls that a lot of companies see with LNG is it's hard because there's not enough fueling stations. But since we're just going back and forth from Orlando to Cocoa Beach, there are already fueling stations available in Miami, and there's going to be fuel in Cocoa Beach because of our locomotives. So it'll be easy to fuel these vehicles, so we can
Utilize the network
Yes.
and achieve the efficiencies through the addition of this innovation.
And you can see more details about this on page 7 and 8 of the handout. And once they are converted and we've reached that kind of threshold, the annual fuel savings per truck would be over $15,000.
So this whole intermodal plan gives us an increase in contribution margin, as we mentioned before. Without the added lines of steam lines, we have a contribution margin of 15%, which is $32 million for 2016. If we have this added volume, we project a 4 million growth in the contribution margin, which, as you can see, is detailed, and it's also detailed on page 3 of the handout. So what would implementing this plan cost? Well, we have to, after the trial and after proving that this plan is successful, we will have to make an upgrade in the Cocoa Beach intermodal facility, which has a cost of $5 million. We would have to buy highway tractors in order to meet that demand, the added demand, and the number of units projected were 51 units times the cost per unit, which is $120,000. The total cost without our innovation would be of $11 million. But if we include the LNG trucks, we would have a conversion cost of $40,000 per unit, and we would plan to convert the 51 trucks we bought for the added demand.
If and only if the trial run of the Cocoa to Orlando line shuttle service is successful.
Yeah.
And we'll show a chart further on here that will show exactly the timeline for the implementation of these services, whether they're profitable.
So we have a total cost of $13 million for the plan. We plan on gaining this money back in around 3.7 years with the LNG trucks, and without the LNG trucks, it's around 2.7 years.
And this is just with the incremental volume with adding those 2 steamship lines.
Yeah, that's not even considering, our competitive edge once we incorporate these services and show to the people who ship with us that we have superior services, superior reliability, and an expanded network that we can offer door-to-door service.
So as we said, we did make a timeline. We do know this is a bit aggressive, but we would want to revisit this and kind of see what our key stakeholders and work with them with the actual timeline on this. First, we want to do a trial to make sure this intermodal service that we're suggesting is successful and that we would have the demand that we are expecting. So we would start the trial this year and continue it into the first quarter of 2016. After that, once it's proven successful and we have confirmed that the demand is there, we'd want to begin with the expansion of the Cocoa Beach facility. And then halfway through 2016 is when we would try our first couple LNG converted trucks. And if that proves to be successful, we would start converting all of the 51 trucks in the beginning of 2017. The additional steamship lines, we project that to be mid-2016 when we would get those to start having an additional port call in Miami.
And that will coincide with the completion of the Panama Canal to the post-Panama as well.
Yep.
And so throughout all this, we made some pretty bold claims here. We talked about spending quite a bit of money with or without the return. We have to talk about obviously the risks. There's financial risks. Obviously, spending $13 million to convert trucks for a line that hasn't even been proven successful. That's why we tried to mitigate some of these with things like trial periods and other execution measures. And then they also have to think about brand equity. When you're starting a new service like this or expanding into areas that you're not already operating in, there's always the risk that you could fail, and that's going to hurt your brand image. And FEC's been around for a while, and we want to really cultivate that and make sure people have the right image of us moving forward. Within kind of brand equity would be reduced service levels. When you're adding volume, 60,000 units, we want to make sure that we have the capacity and then we're able to effectively manage this volume and make sure it's profitable and not reduce our service levels, because that kind of goes counterintuitive to kind of the whole strategy implementation in the first place. And if we are successful, we need to consider our competitors' reaction. We spoke about the routes earlier in the presentation, and I don't know how the whole competitive scheme works, but I'm sure if we started attracting customers and other companies started feeling the pain of our route success, they would definitely implement some countermeasures, either to cut rates or offer a superior service. So that's something we want to stay on top of, kind of a continuous innovation approach. And then lastly, as with pretty much every railroad, we want to put employee safety first. Talking about transloading is a dangerous activity, as well as increasing the volume in the network. We want to make sure that we're not adversely affecting one of our biggest stakeholders, which is our employees. So I just talked about the risks, but with pretty much any innovative strategy or approach or implementation, you're going to have risks. Why do you want to take those? Within our analysis, we found that that was something that's worth taking. We found that with a $4.1 million increase in contribution margin, a 2.56 reduction in average cost per unit handled, and over 60,000 increased 53-foot units, we feel like these risks are worthwhile. I know we threw a lot at you guys right here and made a few bold claims, so we have some backup slides and information in the handouts, and we're ready to answer any questions you guys might have about our proposal. Thank you.
I have a question on the slide we were just on. So in your presentation, you said that option 1 and option 2 scored evenly. So did you base these numbers on a 50-50 split of contribution based on either option or volume contributed?
No, I'm sorry we didn't make that completely clear. We were actually advocating implementing solely option 2,
Okay.
with purely trying to transload all international cargo to the Hialeah facility, trying to use the efficiencies of the 3-to-2 ratio instead of, so that's why we want to focus on Miami versus maybe Fort Lauderdale. Does that answer your question?
It does.
The scoring evenly was also from the perspective of the shipper.
Okay.
So we have the added efficiency of not having the international containers go all the way to Orlando and then have to be sent back to Miami for export.
The assumption then being that you had the volume from the same shipment that would go from 3 containers, it was 3 containers worth of volume being shipped at the same time? What if they just shipped 1 container and then you wanted to convert it? How are you going to do that?
Well, we kind of mentioned that in the original analysis of the customers, saying, does the customer have the demand to utilize this service? So as far as a customer only being able to ship 1 container, which would be quite a bit, the rates would obviously be less competitive without that 3-to-2 reduction. But even so, the rates are still somewhat competitive, if I'm not mistaken.
So our rates are still less with with just having the 1 container for both option 1 and option 2. But once you start having 3 containers with option 2, since you can convert 3 40-foot containers into 2 53-foot containers, then there's an added cost savings.
That's on the handout also.
Which, you know, page?
There's a $200 fee per container transport.
Yes, so
Yes.
like we did all the numbers, comparing option 1 and option 2, having 3 40-foot containers. And we compared those two and we saw that option 2 was, the price
Including
was.
that $200
was
transport.
Yes. So the, here's a slide I think for that. You're that was your.
I apologize.
So this is what we would be for, the rate for option 2 would be, if you had 3 40-foot containers and they'd be transloaded to the, 53-foot domestic containers, it'd be $16,500. And if you look, that's cheaper than any other option that's on the
So
market.
you did 3, all that's 3
Yes,
containers.
sorry, these
So
are
the
3
total
40-foot
price
ISO containers.
For the 3.
So that's where, so if you look at the initial for 1 container, option 1 is a little bit cheaper, but once you move it to 3, it's cheaper than both ports 4.
And option 1 would still be available for use in the special case, and it wouldn't be that special of a case, I assuming someone only wanted to get less than 3 full container loads. But I guess we would be targeting with option 2 people who would be able to move those 2 container loads. But that's a really good plan. I mean, we can speak about that after the presentation. Does anybody else have any other questions?
I have a question. So I thought it was great that you brought up this opportunity with the LNG trucks and how it's synergistic with FEC's moving to the LNG locomotives. When you talked about your ROI, so there's benefit, as you pointed out, the $15,000 a year savings, and you hit a break even when you get to year 3, just on the decision to use an LNG truck in that shuttle operation, right?
The trucks break even, 2.5 years in. And we have
So this is this graph,
Yes.
right?
Yes,
So when you talk about what you need to make the investment work, and you talk about the 13 million there, part of that 13 million has to do with the truck conversion. Part of it has to do with the ROI on the actual service change. So how did you separate those two things in your analysis and deal with them?
Well, the LNG truck conversion will be something extra to the plan.
Okay.
So actually, if you go to the implementation cost. Yeah. So our cost without the innovation is $11 million, which we would have a return in 2.7 years of that initial investment. But as we said, like the conversion cost will only add will add $2 million to our capital investment. But throughout the years, it also gives us a higher return since we're saving in fuel.
Right. So what's the payback period on the LNG trucks by themselves?
It's actually 2.5 years, assuming, so we assumed that our trucks would be about 100,000 miles a year, and that would be doing, on average, if they were doing 4 back and forth trips a day to, from Cocoa Beach to Orlando, which is about 50 miles each way, so, and that's just 5 days a week,
4 trips a day.
4 trips a day, 5 days a week for 50 weeks a year. So then you have the weekends if we're not sending things there, and then have 2 weeks approximately that the truck is not being used. So with that, that's about 100,000 miles a year. and then it would be 2.6 years with each truck would pay off.
Yeah, so I guess to answer your question more specifically, we just separated the two completely, and I guess we didn't, as well as we could have combined all the numbers.
No, when you were doing the presentation, I was not getting the separation as clearly, and part of it is, I think, because the payback period is almost the same, so.
Yeah.
You could explain it.
The numbers are also specified on the handout of what Candace just.
Great. Is there any more questions?
Yeah, why Nordania?
Say again?
I've asked it once. Why Nordania?
The steamship line, you're recommending.
You recommended two
Market
lines,
two,
K-line and Nordania, and I
Well,
just
so-
need to know.
I actually spent quite a bit of time looking in. We started off our kind of targeting analysis by finding all the steamship lines that call to ports in other South American Southern United States ports like
Yeah.
Jacksonville
Yeah.
and Charlotte. And it was really difficult to find lines that hadn't already called on Miami as far as the major lines which operate out of China.
Uh-huh.
And so that's what we found, K-Line, to kind of fill that void. But then we also found Nordana to operate in the Caribbean, and they also do lines to China through the Suez Canal. So kind of from an old school perspective, it's kind of diversification as
Yeah.
far as not just to have China from one route, to have China from multiple routes as well as the Caribbean too.
And we thought it'd be more realistic to have if we're gonna attract a steamship line, if they're already hitting Jacksonville or Savannah, it's gonna be a lot more realistic to get them to stop in Miami than if they're only going from Asia to Long Beach. It's gonna be very out of the way.
It was kind of interesting to see all these major lines already with the port of call in Miami.
Yeah.
It was kind of further verification that even without the Panama Canal being expanded to its 13.5 thousand TEU volume, a lot of these ships already have their port of call in Miami. So it's kind of validation for the whole strategy of having that as a port of call and having it be attractive to other competitors in that space.
Does that answer your question?
No, it was outstanding. I was impressed that you didn't just say target customers, but you said target customers and then you listed two. And I thought, well, you
They had a pretty cool name too, so.
give it some thought, and I was interested in your thought.
You're going to take credit for that on Monday when you
I'm
go back to
writing it
office.
down.
It's a Hertwig and saying, I've got a new customer target.
Yeah, I'd like to answer his question. Now, you also mentioned that they would do call every 4 days. How did you come up with that number?
Well, so I was kind of tasked with the port research and understanding these mega liners coming into these ports, and it varied quite a bit. So if you look at like a liner like Hanjin Company out of China, they'll do about maybe 7 ports of call, or 1 port every 7 days, 1 port of call every 7 days on these Eastern American ports. But then if you look at like one of the top 3 like Maersk, they're doing calls every 2.2 to 3 days, like 2.5 days. So there was a little bit of guesswork involved here because some schedules like Maersk are published beautifully on the internet, really specific. But then something like K-Line, it was difficult to find their actual ports of call. So we kind of estimated it based on their total volume of shipments and kind of put them in between Hanjin and Maersk.
And also, it was kind of based on looking at the schedules since we were comparing it to like Jacksonville and Charleston and Savannah, looking how often they call there.
Hold on. Very, very interesting.
Thanks, guys.
So I do have one more comment on the presentation, just because it's not really negative. You guys did a wonderful job, but when you address a group that's not girls, not guys, and
So
then
sorry.
one other, and I don't remember who said it, I wrote it down, you don't steal cargo, you convert it.
Unprofessionalism at its finest. I apologize.
But the thought is there, it's good, that's where you're going, so, but you just have to
came out
convey
of
that
the-
correctly.
We just came out of the war rooms.
And the ultimate goal is you're gonna steal cargo, so you just have to be, you have to.
A little more
Choose
politically
your
correct.
Yeah, we don't want to collude, okay, but very good, thank you.
Well, ladies and gentlemen, thank you so much for listening to our presentation. This is really a great experience for us, so we're really grateful.
Good job.